Is Mad World Age of Darkness a pay to win nightmare? What we know about the pay to win aspects of Mad World is limited, but that hasn't stopped a lot of online debate about whether or not the game is friendly to free to play players. Now, I want to say I did try to hold off on this video for quite a while to see if any more information would come to light, but with the release date of April 27th coming up so fast, I think it's important for me to get this video out now so you guys have an idea about these systems. Just before we get into that, I do want to let you guys know that I will be streaming on Twitch starting April 21st at 10 a.m. EST, right before the launch of Mad World for the Founders Pack 5-day early access. So I will be there to answer all of your guys' questions, and I hope to see you there. So, like I just mentioned, there's been a lot of talk about some specific aspects of the game that could be considered pay to win. And a large part of that is going to come from trading. So, I want to take a little bit of a deeper dive into that. There are three main types of trading in Mad World. There's direct, there's player shops, and then there is the black market. So, direct trades. This is the simplest and easiest to explain. I think everybody probably has some familiarity with direct trading. Players can just trade items, materials, consumables. Anything tradable can move from one character to another. I don't think anybody really has too much of an issue with that. To follow that up, we have player shops. So, in previous iterations of Mad World, there was options for players to host and run their own shops in town. Set up your character with goods, and other players can come and browse your selections and choose to purchase items from you. There's not a ton of information known about this at the moment. I would imagine there's probably been quite a few changes made, like types of currency used, and if there's like a bartering function. But again, I don't think this is really a huge issue for most players. And finally, we have the black market. So the premise of the black market is that it's an auction house. And if you're familiar with World of Warcraft, Lost Ark, RuneScape, they all kind of have their own version of an auction house. So if you're an avid MMO fan, you've probably come across one. Now, the premise here of an auction house isn't the issue, it's the currency used. If you're unfamiliar, I talked a little bit about currencies in my last video, but for those who haven't watched it, there are three main types of currencies in Mad World. Gold, which is gotten through a large variety of means, just basically playing the game, you're going to gather gold. There are also crystals and Mcash. Mcash is your standard premium currency, and you'll get that by just swiping your credit card. And crystals are bought with Mcash. And crystals are going to be the main currency used for this black market. And I think you can probably see where I'm going with this. Players are very concerned, and I think rightfully so, about those whales swiping their cards, paying a ton of money, and then completely min-maxing their character, getting an immediate and substantial advantage in game. I do want to say a few things before you really make up your mind about this system. The first being that gear has a set amount of times it can be traded. So we're likely not going to see a lot of merchanting and players getting massively rich through the black market. And the second is that regular players spending like 20 bucks a month is not going to be the problem here. It's going to be the players that are spending, hundreds and hundreds of dollars, absolutely min-maxing, going to the extreme and bypassing the grind altogether, that ultimately culminates in like a one shot or a one-sided fight, which no one really has fun with. And I think that's what people are really concerned about when it comes to the black market. All right, so let's talk about consumables. Consumables are something that was brought to my attention in the comments of my last video, and I think a couple good points were made there, which is why I wanted to bring it up. There are a couple really substantial buffs that come from consumables in Mad World, both from potions and from food. Things like being a significantly higher level, getting those late game bosses, and creating powerful armor can be seen as a pretty big advantage, and it could be argued that using these potions, these foods, these consumables to get there faster is pay to win. All right, let's talk experience boosts. We don't know all the information yet about experience boosts, like how big they will be or how long they will last. We just essentially know they are going to exist in Mad World. But I do want to point out a fantastic resource from another content creator named Deopa. He has compiled a ton of information, not just on consumables that I'm going over, but many other things like weapons, gear, and bosses. So I will leave a link down in the description to his website. Go check it out. Now, the founders packs that have been available on the Mad World website list several items that are able to increase experience. And now we don't know the exact details about what awaits us in terms of benefits. It has been confirmed that experience boosts are not exclusive to those founders packs. I asked Dancing Bear, a developer for Jandisoft, and he has confirmed they will be craftable in game and everyone will have access to them. Now, we don't know what level they're unlocked, what skill is used to unlock them, how we would go about unlocking them. They could potentially be a pretty late game item. Now, this would lead to a big advantage for Founders Pack players who decide to rush late game, farm those materials for these foods and potions, and then sell them when demand is high, like when the game becomes entirely free to play on the 27th. And just like experience boosting foods, potions are another way to enhance your character. We're seeing movement speed, damage buffs, mana regeneration, and experience are all things that are on the table for this. Again, this is going to lead to faster progression, hitting those late game stages faster and faster. Foods and potions are pretty similar in the fact that they have those benefits for those who are able to craft them and sell them first. And potions have the advantage of being used basically in every raid, dungeon, boss. So you're going to see them basically everywhere. It's going to be a massive moneymaker for those that get in early. Now, let's talk a little bit about inventory expansion. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, how is inventory expansion a consumable? Well, in Mad World, inventory expansions aren't permanent. It's a purchase made for crystals that allows you to expand your inventory for a specific amount of time. Now, you're going to be able to stack up this time, so you won't have to go back every single week, buy the same thing over again. But the point is, players who are willing to spend crystals will have an easier time farming resources and just generally navigating the game without needing to go back to town. This basically means that they're spending more time actually gaining XP and eventually levels over their non purchasing counterparts. However, I think there is an argument to say here that this is technically a pay for convenience system. They're not directly getting a stat increase from having a larger inventory. They're simply decreasing the downtime they spend in towns by having a bigger bag. So, now that we've talked about trading, players getting gear for crystals, experience buffs, inventory expansion, and the time saved there, I think what we all want to talk about is PvP and how what we just talked about will have an effect on it. As we all know by now, Mad World will have zones where PvP is enabled. Because of this, there have been so many conversations focused on new players getting crushed as soon as they get into the game, huge level differences between Founders Pack players and free to play players, and what safeguards are in place for those that are lower level and actually trying to progress in the game without getting killed. Again, I want to point to Deopa's website for this. He has listed the zones available at the time in the beta with things like zones levels, PvP, it being restricted or not. And assuming there hasn't been massive changes made to which zones are PvP enabled, this will give you a better idea of where you're going to be vulnerable so you can make preparations ahead of time. And to go along with that, let's talk about camping. Camping of new players is a massive problem. If no new players are getting through the game will die and it will die fast. I think part of the reason I delayed this video again is that I was really hoping we would get some sort of information on this, but unfortunately, we just haven't received much. So ultimately, we don't know what we're in for. There is one thing though, and I didn't talk about this in my last video. The Madness Meter or Madness Bar, not really sure what the name is quite yet, is a system designed to protect players. So when a PKer decides to attack someone, their meter will build. Once it reaches certain thresholds, they're going to be hit with debuffs and potentially drop their items on death. This does disincentivize just the killing of mass new players because their meter would build so quickly and they'd be at risk almost immediately if they started. And finally, when it comes to PvP, I do want to say that if you're a new player joining Mad World, you should probably expect to die a few times while you're getting your bearings. It happens to everyone, and it's just in a game where PvP is going to be a core system. I think it's basically inevitable for every new player to die at some point. So you probably should be prepared for that. And to end this video, I kind of wanted to summarize my thoughts on this situation as well. So to start with, Ubisoft does seem open to changing systems in game. They do have a section in their official Discord dedicated to user suggestion. This can be used to voice your opinions on this topic and offer potential solutions. So whether you like the current systems in place or you want to change them, I think just letting them know will help the game survive in the long run. So, part of my thought process when trying to evaluate if Mad World is truly going to be a pay to win game can be broken down into two parts. The first being the time it takes to gather materials, and the second is the success rate of upgrades. Both of these systems have probably been massively changed, and from what was last experienced in the most recent beta. But let's expand on this a little bit. So, let's say there's a 100% free to play player trying to create an item of equivalent stats to one being sold in the black market. If that player is able to create said item in a reasonable time, reasonable depends on the person, then would you still consider the game pay to win, or would you say that that person using crystals in the black market is just trying to pay for convenience? In this case, time saved. And to follow that up, I think the black market is not a one way transaction where crystals spent just disappear and go into the void. They're going to go into the economy. Someone is going to get those crystals. And in an ideal world, that will stimulate more trade. And then eventually, we're going to hopefully have a thriving market. So I think just it being a way for free to play players to obtain crystals is also pretty beneficial to the game in the long run. And finally, I want to say I don't want people to use this video as justification for bandwagoning in either direction because we truly don't know the impact that all these systems will have on Mad World. It's impossible to say with 100% certainty. We just haven't seen it. I just think it's important to speak openly about these topics. And with that being said, I'd like to know your thoughts on the situation. If you've had experience with other MMOs or previous Mad World betas with similar systems in place, I think all that information is really, really valuable. So let me know whether it's in the comments or on Discord. I'm very curious about your thoughts.